Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Appalachia stories, thread theme, backwoods magic, post-paranormal, spiritual, or unknown strange vents from the Appalachian Mountains if you've been or know someone. A focus on anything involving magic like anons, witch grandma, or similar such spiritual experiences. Have a spooky painting while I suffer in my own thread. Have no Appalachia stories to tell, but if this ends up somewhere else, I guess this makes for a cool thumbnail.
There seems to be a lot of stories of old ladies doing weird shit to heal warts in the Appalachias. Most magic people think of as goetia, and that's what most will encounter, but the average magic in the mountains of the North American continent is deeply individual and manifestational, in that it manifests from the deep belief of the practitioner only, in whatever form it takes, such as overnight healings, grandma shining moonlight on your wart with no ritual or mumbling bullshit, and you wake up with it gone. Mountains may be one of the best places to learn magic from within, that isn't borrowing power as it is with goetia.
What makes the mountains good to learn magic within? Is it just that they're old, lots of ley lines? What's going on over there?
Application of magical folk healing derives from the English cunning man traditions. Osman and Steele is the book to get on this matter. English cunning is the sibling of the German Braucherei tradition. Look for powwows and long lost friend. Compare the two books.
Not Appalachia, but Northern Appalachian Mountains checking in. Flatlander New Englanders need not apply. Weird shit? Yeah, plenty. Wooded mountains are their own thing. We got a lot of what would be called hedge magic or just flat-out paganism around that develops kind of naturally. Work with a younger kid in town. Nice kid, generally getting his shit in order. We start chatting about life in the woods. He tells me about his brother. His brother physically can't be in the woods. Panics real hard and runs. This brother is a shithead, always messing with trees, trying to cut him down for no reason. Kid tells me he feels something out there, but he's kind of chill and respectful to it. Still gets warnings to not go certain places when he's out wandering. I've felt similar warnings too. We compare notes. A few of the places are legit the same. Do not fuck with the mountain forest spirits.
One of the stranger things I've had happen to me directly was hearing something enter my room while lying on my bed and feeling the weight of the steps, the sound of them. But I didn't turn around for some reason, despite knowing at least partially in that moment that it was weird. I had closed my door and didn't hear it open. As soon as I felt them behind me, they just as quickly started to exit, and I turned around and was confused upon the realization that I had shut my door and it was not opened or closed when something walked by me. They weren't panicked steps, but slow and paced, but it was like they did a 180 and walked right out. I think I thought it was my dog at first, or maybe my sister, but when I heard it leave and turned around to an unopened door with no sound of opening or closing at all, I was stunned and will always remember it, because I almost turned around, but there was just enough passive reason not to in my head. Like thinking I should turn around, but it was probably someone and they'll say something. And I remember stalling and not turning for literally no reason. It always felt like fate, or maybe even a very subtle psychic suggestion to keep me from turning around while it was moving behind me. I had this feeling of knowing I should, but a very subtle but surprisingly influential part of my psyche didn't want to. There was no fear or random negative emotion, but it was such a subtle part that didn't even want to bother to turn my head. I only speculated so much about this part because it turned out to be very eerie the second I had the suspicions in the back of my head confirmed about the door. I remember wanting and knowing I should turn around to see who randomly came into my room, but something kind of nullified me, just enough and just long enough for it to walk out. Footsteps fade and I eventually turn around and the door is shut. I've had things become unplugged inexplicably too.
Any random spirit could do this to you, or it's the classic brain half-dreaming while awake thing.
I was wide awake in the middle of the day.
This one is more wholesome than spooky, but our ghost came to say goodbye to me. Be us, family of 5 in an old farmhouse in rural Appalachia. House haunted by a mischievous ghost. Ghost never does spooky, creepy shit. Just messes with family, like old man playing pranks, makes noises in ears, opens and closes doors and such. Will always stop if you ask. I moved out of the house when I was 13, rarely thinking of Grandpa Ghost. Many years later, I'm asleep in bed. Wake up to what feels like someone sticking their arm under me. No one in the room. Dad tells me about plywood in the garage that was knocked over. Says maybe Grandpa Ghost followed us. I told him about the ghost arm that woke me up. Find out that ghostly things happened to each of my siblings. Find out later that the house I grew up in was torn down around the same time as the ghost arm incident. My face when Ghost Granddad stopped in to say goodbye.
My dad and his mother sold their souls to save the lives of their family members during the worst days of the Great Depression. Their neighbor across the road in that coal town was outside watching his younger siblings. He saw Dad's mother in her garden hoeing around seedlings. That bit of information will be important later. The neighbor was then a young man old enough to take an adult job. There was one job opportunity and many men were applying for it. Dad put in a good word for this man, they being about the same age, and even gave him the newly ironed shirt off his back to wear to the interview where he got that job. That happened that morning. In the evening, everyone was feeling good in that town because this man's pay would keep many of them alive. Everyone shared, and Dad's family was known for sharing even though it hurt them. Then, different people in the town, along with Dad's neighbor, witnessed a huge fireball coming across the sky. It made a maneuvered turn to head towards Dad's house. This man and his siblings looked at each other and started to run to help, though it looked like no one could survive what was headed for them over there. They found that their legs would not move, and even using all their strength and their upper body strength, they could not free their legs to make them move. They woke up the next morning not knowing how they got into the right beds or even in the right bedclothes. Not only were their parents unresponsive to their talking about this incident to get their help to go help Dad's family, but their parents froze in place, not breathing or speaking. Seeing as that particular topic always caused them to do that, they stopped doing it, making up their minds to go over there themselves. Across the road they went onto the property, down a lane a bit, and in full view were all members of the family aside from Dad and his mother, all lined up looking scared to death, but nonetheless undamaged. A short distance from the house was a circular area that was smoking heavily. The law in coal country was that everyone pitched in to put out any fire because all the houses were sitting on top of coal that lay on the surface. If it got into a coal field to any depth, it might not stop burning ever. So, loss of homes, loss of jobs, loss of all they held dear. Dad came walking towards them with a shotgun in his hands. His mother wasn't far behind and was also carrying a shotgun. Dad told them to leave the property and never come back. He didn't seem himself, and those two families had been like kin to each other for a very long time. Dad showed them that his gun was loaded, as did his mother, and they walked them off the property at gunpoint. From that day on, he and his mother were never the same people again. I saw her just days before her death and saw something come out of her eyes. She became a very kind, cheerful person, which was everything I knew she had never been to me. Her eyes were different. She asked if she was in heaven, and I said no, so she asked who we were. Dad and I were the only people there. I told her I was her granddaughter and he was her son. She stammered and said that couldn't be. Then she wanted to know how she got there since she was just in her garden hoeing around seedlings. Remember that before the fireball came down, the neighbor had seen her in her garden hoeing around seedings. She looked at her hands and began shrieking really loudly. She asked how her hands could be so old and wrinkled and was sobbing. Dad got a mean look on his face and told her to remember that she'd agreed to a deal and she must stand by it or else. She died when she was 92. It was after her death that the family, along with my aunt, uncle, and cousin, went down to the old home place they'd grown up on to get some of Grandma's flowers from her rock garden. The house was long gone and trees and plants were growing all over the place. The forest was reclaiming the property. That's why we found it very odd that a perfectly circular area that Dad stood sobbing over was quite peculiar. Nothing was growing there at all. No birds flew over it, no bugs were seen there or any other living thing. In fact, that entire area was devoid of birds. They were making wide berths around it. The rock garden some distance away was blooming and growing just fine. As well, there were woods, plants, and flowers nearby that were also doing quite well. No other area was devoid of life except that circular area. My brother dragged me over there so I could help him figure out why Dad was sobbing while looking at that spot, and why nothing was living there. Standing there on the rim of that circular area, I said under my breath in great frustration, "What in God's name is he looking at?" That's when something very strange happened. The ground over that circle eased off of it back to the edge of the circle like the reverse of water pooling on a floor. I saw this saucer-shaped craft, and then it opened up like those medical books with the transparent pages showing the nervous system on the top, the circulatory one on the one beneath that, and the organs on the one at the bottom. I was looking into this craft and saw a living being working what looked like controls. It was seated at first, moving its hands over these lighted different color lights with the palms of its hands. I thought that person was awfully skinny and bald. Then it got up from the seat and turned around so much that I could see its face. It didn't see me, but I could clearly see it. I gasped and at the same time felt like I was falling down into that thing, which was a distance down there, and fearing that I'd grabbed my brother's legs on the way down and held on for dear life. He asked what was going on and if I was okay. I said, "Did you not see that?" He asked, "See what?" Then he whispered loudly that Dad was watching us and to get up. He helped me up and said to play it cool. I looked up to see Dad's face and thought he would kill me if I told him what I'd seen. He'd kill me before I could get it out, and I knew it. He came over to us so fast it shocked us both. Then he demanded to know what I'd seen in a tone of voice that meant that he knew what I'd seen. I asked what he meant to give myself more time to come up with something. He said, "You know what?" I stammered a bit and said I thought I saw a spider or snake move down there. Of course, he knew why nothing was growing there already, so it wasn't a good thing for me to say in hindsight. When he ordered us to get down there and find that thing, I told him I'd rather not, because it could be poisonous. He said my brother would dig while I showed him what place to look. So we both got down and my brother whispered close to me to know what we were looking for, seeing as there was nothing alive in that area. I got his meaning and said, "Well, I thought I saw something move." He said, "No. What did you really see?" I told him to shut up and just help me look if he wanted to survive. He said I was going to tell him later, though I told him the same story I told Dad. Better that no one else knew what I knew, because they'd probably not believe it. Not finding what Dad ordered us to find, he wanted an explanation. And so I said it must have been dead leaves moving that made it look like a snake's skin, as they are colored, just like dead leaves many times. He asked if I was sure that's what I saw, and I said it had to have been because I had nothing else. He glared at me right in the eyes and said that had better be all I saw. He held that glare and finally told us to leave the area completely and go over by the path. We weren't allowed to talk to each other, which was fine by me. My brother was digging around something that looked like stainless steel over by that tree, and Dad asked him what he was doing. He said it could be something good, but Dad covered it back up with an old piece of tin and ordered him to leave it alone or else. We watched Dad for some time until someone got his attention, and I went over to see what my brother wanted. He said we had to get that thing he'd been digging at because it looked like one of those new stainless steel bowls that had been on the TV commercial, and they were expensive. He said if Dad caught me digging at it, I could talk my way out of it. I was good at that. I went over and saw that it looked like one of those things, so I dug the woods dirt away from it quickly and pulled. It was stuck fast and solidly. Dad spotted me and asked what I was doing, so I gave him the story of the expensive bowl just on the market and how this one was just lying around in the woods, looking like nothing was wrong with it. Anytime we could appeal to his sense of greed, he took it hook, line, and sinker. He told me to pull it out, and I said it wouldn't budge. So he told me to stick my hands underneath it to see what was holding it down. I felt the air being sucked into some tubes at the bottom of this bowl. I asked why it would be doing that, and he said it could be a still, but I didn't know what that meant. He uncovered a great length of pipe leading from it, and it made a turn back towards that circular area where nothing was growing. My brother said so openly and loudly. Dad jumped up and started thinking out loud that we'd know what he was thinking, and if we knew what he was, we'd hurt him. We all did an about face and acted like we hadn't been hearing what he was saying. He was always a violent person who said there were no live witnesses. He yelled at all of us to forget what we just saw. My brother laughed and asked if that meant to forget what we'd just heard him say too. I could have hit him for asking that, but still, I couldn't blame him since what he'd said was very telling in some ways. Dad told us all to forget what they'd heard too, and if they didn't, he could make us forget. So that was that. It happened in the early 1970s. So that's the explanation for an area where life should be no different than anything else near it. But for some reason, nothing was alive in that circle. I remember the old UFO reports of them sitting down in farmers' fields, and where they touched the ground, nothing would grow even when the soil was dug up and replaced. They usually left triangular marks where the feet of the craft touched the ground. I have seen another place in another wood where there was a non-working craft and there were living things where it was. Nearby that area is a long stretch of ground, also in the same woods where nothing grows. Nothing has ever grown there, and it's been decades. Dad used to do some strange things back there too. I know that farmers in our area planted their fields as usual, and they discovered that even though they planted the field the same way they always had that particular area where the craft sat down, it did not grow anything. Even weeds didn't grow in those places. I'd read where they dug down a good 6 feet, took that soil away and replaced it with good healthy dirt, and still nothing would grow there.
I need validation that I'm not insane. I've never really had paranormal experiences, but I cannot explain this. I'm in college and I and some other 7 people from my school went on a backpacking trip, and we had 2 experienced leaders. We drove to Zaleski State Forest, which is in the Appalachian region of Ohio. It was early April, and it was cold and everything was still dead from winter. After hiking miles into the forest, we set up camp at the backpacking campsite, and there were a couple other groups of people as well. A few of them were friendly older couples and then 2 college-age girls. Everyone was pretty spread out from each other, so we set up camp farther away from everyone else. I have always been able to sense the energy of places, and the energy in this area wasn't great. It was almost spooky. Each of us had individual, one-person tents, and we formed a kind of a cluster on this site, with my tent being in the back so no one was behind me. Our cluster was also right next to the forest because this backpacking site was like a big cleared-off square in the middle of the trees. Fast forward, I'm dead asleep around 2 a.m., and I wake up to leaves crunching right behind my tent. I hear footsteps walking in circles around my tent. They had a sort of heaviness to them that couldn't be a deer or a dog. Also, it sounded like just 2 legs. I cannot make this up. This creature was circling my tent for long periods, slowly creeping up to the sides of my tent and then just stopping for periods, and then would move on to waking around the rest of our tent cluster. I could hear human-like breathing from the mouth when it was close to my tent, like a light sort of heaving. I was shaking, too scared to unzip my tent and investigate. I kid you not, this occurred for hours, and it seemed I was the only one awake. Out of nowhere, I saw an illuminated light shape from my tent, although I couldn't tell what it was from inside my tent because it was all zipped up. It was like a warm glow. I might have assumed it was someone's flashlight, except no one was moving. I was paralyzed in fear. I simply couldn't believe it was an animal. At some point I fell asleep due to sheer exhaustion, but I could hear the heavy footsteps circling until I did. In the morning, I questioned my fellow campers about it, and my leader admitted she heard the footsteps and noises as well, admitting it was bizarre and she would have investigated had she not been so groggy. One of the boys in the group said he also noticed the light that came on, but thought it was someone else. Not a single person in this group woke up to go out or turn on a light that night. I've heard things about the Appalachian regions being creepy and bizarre, and now I believe it.
I've occasionally heard about the dancing black aunt phenomenon. Now and then I've seen it in a random comment here on /X, but I've only known 2 people to talk about it in person. I only call it this because that's the best, shortest way to describe it. They're practitioners of some sort of folk magic, which is centered around clogging. They're always black women in their late 40s to early 60s. They don costumes of simple button blouses and long full skirts, that are ankle length with multiple petticoats. A few wear an apron, usually having some herbs in one of the pockets. This getup is only used when they're on business, which is acting as a sort of tour guide or guardian figure to those in the Appalachian area. They're sometimes sighted at festivals or social gatherings, but usually show up at random to people in need. I know that the magic is used to bring joy and ward off evil with storytelling, companionship, and dancing. A lot of their influence seems to help kids and younger teens, and usually appear to them. Sometimes, even in dreams, stories seem to come from the North Carolina and Tennessee border, sometimes up to the Shenandoah area and going down to Chattanooga.
I had my own experience with somebody like this. Here goes. Be 2004, about 12. Living in Wytheville, Virginia to foster parents. Dad was a drunk and Mom was in jail for murder. Foster parents were state appointed. Kept seeing shadow figures within the first 3 weeks of living in a new place. They'd peer out of the closet, even if lights were on. Don't really remember how it came about, but there was a black girl at school who talked to me. I tell her of the shadow people in my room. Comes to visit with her aunt a day later. Curly, long-haired, professional-looking woman with big earrings in her 50s. Worked at a bank, if I recall correctly. Talks to parents, then scoped out my room. Does a visible shiver at some point, and tells me to stay out of the room and she'll be back in a few days. Warns my foster parents to let me sleep on the couch. Weekend comes, she comes back. Is in clothes like what Anon posted about. Reminded me like something out of a 90s Western on TV. Brought a potted lavender plant. Has a mix of dried herb leaves in her apron pocket. Scattered a few about the room. Told me it's wormwood, thyme, and lavender. Especially sprinkling some in the closet. Then starts dancing all around my room. She kept pace to something in her own head, doing several twirls while moving her feet like a tap dancer. Bumped and brushed her skirts into things in the room like my bed, desk, and door. Goes to the closet door, does some hard stomping and whisks skirts towards the closet, as if to shoo something. Finishes her routine, tells me I should be fine. Told foster parents to plant the lavender outside the window. Offers that if anything worse happens, call her and she'll come look into it. Never see shadow people again.
I live in South America and there are a lot of ladies like the one you mentioned. She was most likely from one of these African folk religions you mentioned.
I've lived in Appalachia for all but 4 years of my life, and I'm almost 22, and I've never experienced any of the creepy things people say about the Appalachian Mountains until the story I'm about to tell you. So toward the end of last year, 2023, 2 of my friends and I had sort of simultaneous crises, which eventually led us to get rid of almost all of our belongings, quitting our jobs, leaving our apartments, and living out of our cars and traveling around the southeast US. Well, on our first night on our big trip, we went to stay with a friend of one of my travel mates. She lived in Tennessee in the Appalachian Mountains, the Smoky Mountains specifically. She lived off a back road in the middle of the woods. The first night we were there, she told us that there were strange occurrences on the property. The house was haunted, and there was something in the woods. She told us that whatever is in the woods likes to hang out around her shed. She said that one night she was walking up onto her porch when she got the overwhelming feeling of being watched. Becoming fed up with whatever it was, she screamed something along the lines of "go away" into the woods, only for something to scream right back at her. She claimed to have seen it one night from her kitchen window. She said it was peeking around the shed, staring at her. It wasn't an animal, but it wasn't human either. Out of curiosity, I asked her to describe whatever creature she saw in more detail, but she refused. I, being the skeptic that I am, basically disregarded everything she said and forgot about it. Now, because it was our first night on the trip, and it was so fun and new to us, we wanted to sleep in our cars, which were parked right in front of the shed I mentioned earlier. Yes, that shed. We hadn't yet made window covers, so we were sleeping in 3 SUVs with uncovered windows completely surrounding us. But I had no issue with this. I thought the worst that could happen would be that I'd wake up with a bear staring at me. So I went to bed peacefully and woke up in the middle of the night, really needing to urinate. I got half-dressed, put on my shoes, left my car, walked to the edge of the woods, did my business, got back in my car, and went to sleep. No uneasy feeling, no feeling of being watched, nothing. The next night I once again woke up, really needing to relieve myself. So just like I did the night before, I sat up in bed, put on my pants, got my shoes ready, and reached for the door handle. But I couldn't do it. It was like every hair on my body stood on end, and I got this overwhelming feeling of dread and foreboding. Now, I had a makeshift bed in the back of my SUV, on top of all the back seats that I flipped down. So I'm sitting there in my bed, looking around through all of my uncovered windows. I can't see anything outside, except for some faint outlines of trees and the glints off of my travel mates' cars. I neither saw nor heard anything that should be putting me on edge. I reached for the door handle again, but I once again got that terrible feeling. I continued to look around, tried to reach for the door, and withdrew my hand. I finally gave up and said screw it, and just went into an empty water bottle. The next morning I got up and was talking to my travel mates, and one of them mentioned waking up in the middle of the night out of nowhere and experiencing an overwhelming feeling of being watched. She sat up in her makeshift bed and looked all around, only to see nothing. I can't lie, when she said that, I got a bit of a knot in my stomach. I asked her what time it was when that happened, and she estimated that it was around the same time I woke up, around 3 a.m. I then told both of them about my experience, and we were all a little freaked out about it. When we were headed out to our cars the following night, we noticed that all of the homeowner's many outdoor cats were sitting on her front porch, which we hadn't seen the last 2 nights. Previously, they would all be scattered around the property if they were even in sight. We thought it was weird, but we didn't think much of it. We all climbed into our cars and said our goodnights on our walkie-talkies. It was a pretty warm and muggy night for October, so we all had our battery-powered fans running. One of my friends frustratedly reported that her walkie was dying. Then, my other friend reported that their fan had died. Then, my walkie started dying. And it continued until, in 5 minutes, all of our electronic camping gear, walkies, flashlights, and fans had all died. Finding this incredibly creepy, we all decided that we should just sleep in the house to be better safe than sorry. We were gathering up our things to move inside when I began to hear what sounded like something large walking through the leaves in the woods. I kept stopping what I was doing and looking toward my friends, who were standing right by the woods. They seemed unbothered every time, so I would just continue what I was doing. That was when I heard a louder noise coming from the woods, and finally decided to walk over to my friends. Turns out, one of them was standing watch, while the other one gathered the rest of her things. Me and my friend stood there watching my other friend's back, and it kept sounding like whatever was in the woods kept getting closer to us. Soon enough, my friend had gathered all her things, and we calmly but quickly went into the house. From what I can remember, we slept in the house the following night as well, but the night after that, one of my friends borrowed some sage from the homeowner and saged all along the wood line and around our vehicles before we got ready for bed. We slept perfectly fine for that night and every night after. No more weird feelings, noises, nothing. Of course, we were pretty much perpetually on edge from then on, but it was never quite the same feeling of dread and foreboding that I had felt before. To be honest, I don't know what to make of all of it. I know I didn't see anything, but the feeling I got was unlike anything I had ever experienced. That was the first and only time in my life where I have gotten that feeling, especially just out of nowhere. I've told the story a few times now, and I've had people tell me that it was just a bear. But I don't think a bear would give me that sort of instinctual feeling of danger when I can't even hear or see it. And I'm fully aware that I may be biased now, but I've lent a bit more credibility to the homeowner's stories after my experience. For those of you that are curious, no, we are not still on the trip. Unfortunately, the whole thing went downhill after a couple of months, and we are now integrating back into society. We are, however, all still friends. And no, we did not experience anything like this again, despite staying at several campgrounds in the middle of the woods in other parts of the southeast.
I do think there's power in folk energy. In Navajo tradition, a skinwalker is someone who takes a shortcut in gaining supernatural power by sacrificing someone close to them, so they get rewarded despite being less skilled, because they sacrificed someone close to them. Supposedly, after sacrificing someone, skinwalkers can fly around. If they didn't sacrifice someone, it would have taken them way longer to learn. Source: Shanklen. I wonder if those women in the woods were knowledgeable at all. But I know the Navajo consider sacrifice a shortcut to casting spells, so maybe they were doing something.
The work of my life is figuring out inherent power, not drawing from spirits, demons pretending to be gods or goetic entities, since borrowing power from something else is always a Faustian deal. Some of the folk magic accounts, like the wart-healing stories anons have posted, seem like inherent magic.
That's what's troubling. The Navajo consider it the darkness, or just the evil of this world, but I think it's demons, or some equally malevolent force. You're making a deal with someone, or thing, else that already has the knowledge, rather than learning the rituals and the knowledge oneself.
You're dead on with the sacrifice thing. I know this isn't what OP is asking for, but it is from the Appalachians and is relevant to your comment. It's a thing that, as devout Christian as a ton of people are there, they'll give their soul to the devil or demons to make something happen, usually out of sheer desperation and desire, such as wishing a family member would be around or their lover would love them. They usually don't know that they're off worse, with the person of focus almost always dying, if not someone close to them. This story is a good example. I heard this from someone in 2018 who lived in the room below the apartment of this lady. A lady was living in Northeast Tennessee. I want to say Kingsport or Church Hill, not 100% sure. Her brother was in Iraqi freedom with the army. She was torn apart that her brother may be killed daily, so she randomly said that she'd do anything to have her brother back home. I think she did some ritual from what this person said, but something was done to commit to the wish. Lo and behold, her brother came home within a month. But after seeing him and taking him home from the airport, he died that very night of a heart attack. She was devastated and was basically a walking zombie since, and moved somewhere else out of the apartment complex. The apartment would remain vacant, and the landlord would be unable to rent it. During the night, furniture would randomly move around and there'd be loud noises. A pastor did get called, but I don't know if they ever solved it.
I live in a cabin all alone in these ancient mountains. Nothing bad happens because I'm nobody. I walk at night along the mountain ridge and smoke. I love it here. No cell service and my Starlink sucks ass because I'm surrounded by 200-foot mountain trees. I am visited by deer, bears, turkey, snakes, insects, elk, all the cool shit. I'm all alone and causing all the mayhem you see today. Shh, don't tell no one. I'm not supposed to be here. I clawed my way from nothing to here, and no man will stop me on this earth. Enjoy the ride, it's about to get even crazier. The whole world is going to burn. Fuck 'em all.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.